All right, so welcome to another edition of Bull in the Basement. I'm back in the basement. There was a time, and you'll see soon, where I went out of the basement to Buffalo Distilling, and that was an interesting process. And again, you'll see that shortly when we pop it up on the YouTube and the Spotify. But now we're back in the comforts of the basement, joined by a gentleman who, honestly, we sort of worked together, kinda, but we crossed paths, but didn't really know each other. Throughout the short history of Bull in the Basement, we've had, let's see, athletes and actresses and comedians and concert promoters, and I'm forgetting what else. But now we have an author who is a former Buffalo Bills executive. Don Purdy joins us. Here's the book. It is Thundersnow of Buffalo, the October surprise storm. And if anyone was here, and this is so appropriate, Don, that we're doing this now because it's our 15th, and I cannot believe it's 15 years since this happened. It was what, Friday the 13th, 06. In fact, my wife and I were dating when the storm hit. You have an incredible story. I have my story. But first of all, thanks for doing Bull in the Basement. I've read the book. It's fantastic. For people that are Western New Yorkers, they're going to be able to grab onto so many different little nuggets and bits and pieces. And there's a lot of things that people don't know about the October surprise storm in the book. That's great. Archway Publishing, right, is your publisher?
Yep, they are.
And you have a co-writer as well, not a ghost writer technically, right?
He's a legit co-author. He happens to be, I think he's in Florida now, but Billy Clune, who, funny enough, was 14 years old when we started writing this book. He was a neighbor friend of ours. He lived behind us. He used to cut through our property to visit family he had, and we got to know him. If we were outside, he'd hang out with us. And the year after the storm, he was doing just that, and we were sharing some stories about the storm. He had some good ones. I had a few from the Bills, and he kind of flippantly said, "Hey, maybe we should write a book." And I said, "All right, let me get some stories from guys at the office and players and get what their thoughts were." And we ended up with maybe 30 pages or so. Really, really good stuff. Not enough for a book, but I thought if anything else, he's going to have a heck of a school project. I can get into more how we resurrected the project last summer. But at the time I thought, life happened and it just didn't materialize. But then last summer it kind of found its way back into our lives, and Billy's now a 28-year-old mental therapist and one of the smartest guys I know. But literally, from starting it at 14 and finishing it at 28 with all that gap in between is not your typical book story, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I listen, like I said, we never really formally worked together. We never really knew each other that well. We knew who I knew who you were, you knew who I was back around the time when the storm hit. When I was doing radio for the Bills, you were working for the Bills in the front office. Part of the book that I find really interesting is kind of like what you did and your relationship with the players and the money and the contracts and the workman's compensation stuff that you write about, which was really interesting that I never knew about. So aside, like storm aside, the Bills stuff, Bills Mafia fans are going to go crazy for the Bills stuff because it's really, really cool and really, really inside. And I got to say, the one part of the book that brought me to a really special warm place was when you talked about the charter and flying on it and what you had to go to get onto the plane and the TSA and the per diem envelopes and all of that and where some of the money went and how it was distributed and this, that, and the other thing. Really, really cool stuff because I remember it. I tell people stories of the charter and flying with the team and staying in the team hotel all the time. And that brought me back to a really cool place. So I appreciate that from a personal perspective.
Yeah, that's primarily how I knew you, Rich. I would see your name on the manifest. Oh, Rich is flying with us this week with him. And it was funny to me, this isn't in the book, but you're making me remember particularly when we would return from a game. And like for you, I knew you mainly from the radio. Knew your voice, and that was the case. I can go all the way back to Van Miller, maybe talk about John Murphy and some others, Jeff Russo, and their voices are so distinctive as knowing them from hearing them in their respective media. But then, if they're a row or two behind you and you're hearing those voices like yours in real life, so to speak, unfiltered, unscripted, and you hear John Murphy say, "Man, I can't believe what a BS call that was in the third quarter." or anything. Just like, oh man, okay, he's and it always cracked me up. Like, wait a minute, that's oh yeah, it's really him, and really and talking, speaking freely, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. Those were great times, for sure. So okay, and then thinking about this and hearing that you've written a book, I'm like, man, I never pictured Don to be an author. So you sort of got into the grassroots of how the book started. So talk a little bit about how it went from your 30 pages to a almost 300-page book. And I gotta
Right,
say, I don't know if you journalized, but man, you have incredibly specific anecdotes from that week, which is really remarkable. From the weekenders to your kids to setting up that Saturday flight, literally the day after the storm, to get to Detroit for the Bills to play that football game on Sunday. I mean, you had some really, really remarkably specific anecdotes. So tell me a little bit about
well,
how all of that was put together.
well, first of all, you're giving my memory way too much credit because, again, we did start the book in 2007 or 8. So I had a lot of notes, even if it was just an information dump. Like I think I talked about even remembering who I ate with in the meal room, whether it was Chris Brown and Greg Pastore. And as much as I like those guys, I can't honestly say if I was sitting here 15 years later, I would have remembered that I was eating, at the meal table with them. But since I recorded those events, at least in a real rough draft, way back then, it was easy to pull and to know we were accurate. And that's something that we were really hung up on, is the accuracy, because last thing you want to have is someone, the book features over 50 contributors. And the last thing I wanted was for a contributor to read what they gave us in the part that they were in it and be like, that's not what happened. And then it casts doubt on the rest of the book. So accuracy was very important to us, but so it helped to have the notes from the year before. Um, and then as far as it going from 30 to 300 pages, again, we had 50 authors. Even though my story and Billy's story, they're kind of running narratives. I mean, we took the tree to the roof, and our basement flooded. We were out without power for 8 days. That happened to hundreds of thousands of people. Um, Even though that's kind of home base in the book, coming back to that in those few days, I really look at, I mean, yes, I guess I am an author, a rookie author at that, but to me, there are 50 authors, and Billy and I, one of the things that make the book unique is that we really composed their stories and tried to do it in a chronological way to have it flow. The publishers did a great job of, first of all, a little trick we had was anytime we introduced someone new, we had their name in bold for the first time. So, okay, here's a new character, so to speak. I mean, they're real people, real stories. And second of all, we might have a different font. And so you'll know that that's their story. And then when it's over, you're coming back to the narrative. And the publishers did an excellent job of helping the reader be able to not be like, wait a minute, who's talking? Where are we now? I mean, so that was helpful as well. I would hope you saw it that way.
Yeah, I mean, so you have bold print, you have sort of italicized print for the actual stories that your 50 contributors donated to the book. And so the contributors include people like the mayor, like the state police captain that was sort of in charge of everything here in Western New York. You
Yeah.
had meteorologists, you had Buffalo Bills players and staffers, and how it was getting to and from the facility if they could or couldn't, throughout the book. Really remarkable. And listen, everybody that lived through that day in Western New York has a story. We all do. It's really, and rarely do people forget, uh, albeit some people in Western New York, and this is part of the book too, didn't see the storm, right? They were either too far north or too far south, and were like, and you dedicate portions of the book to this, where you tell stories about people that were in Ellicottville, like, what are you talking about? There was a storm in Buffalo, or they were in NT or up in Niagara County. What are you talking about? There's a storm in Buffalo, and everybody's like crippled. What are you talking about? I got nothing here. I got green grass. Like you're a West Seneca guy. I live in Lancaster, and like we went through the knife storm, right? What was that? 13, I think it was, where we got 5, 6, 7 feet of snow.
14, yeah, the
14?
November, no, 2014 snow, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we all went through that, but I'll never forget talking to my in-laws in Williamsville / Clarence. They had sunny skies and grass. They were like, what are you talking about? You've got 7 feet of snow. Like, yeah, it's weird. I know it's Buffalo. Like, it's the lake. It's a system. It happens, right?
It's the lake, that lake, yeah, and that Canadian cold front, and just it was. I mean, for the October storm, it was literally, and Don Paul helped frame this for us, and Billy did a great job of looking it up historically. That the last time there was a storm like this in October was 1906, exactly 100 years earlier. And it's funny to read the newspaper clippings. They're talking about telegrams and the trolley cars being stopped, but very well written, I got to say. But I had the privilege of being on earlier this summer with Chris Brown and Steve Tasker, and Steve said the same thing. Like Chris lived in Lancaster and got pounded like you did, but Steve lived in East Aurora, and he said he had no idea. What are they talking about? They were untouched, and then he had to travel for CBS, so had no idea. It was just like it was in the zone or out of the zone, and we tried to help readers understand that. There's a map in there too that does show the red zone. I think Billy put a caption in there. It's good to be in the red zone in football, but not on a weather map.
That's right.
Yeah.
So again, you talked to meteorologists. You just mentioned Don Paul, but you talked to Aaron Mankowski and Chesley McNeil and Patrick Hammer, who wasn't here but looked back and did some research about how the storm. And it's really incredible their breakdown where it comes down to like 1 or 2 degrees in the temperature department, right? That determined whether or not it was going to be what it became, or it was just going to be like a rain event, right?
Oh,
Crazy.
that was remarkable to me. And again, I found myself so much of being, learning to be an author, but I also was a student of weather. And I have a moderate interest in weather. You kind of have to keep your eye on it around here in Western New York. But the going in so deep in the weeds that those meteorologists you just mentioned was fascinating because they said, in terms of the air pressure and 1 degree of temperature, would affect the power of 100 or 200,000 people, and it's what happened. It was just so on the edge of being either so destructive or we could have missed it, but it ended up being the most destructive, by multiple measures, the most destructive storm, most damaging storm in Buffalo's history.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that in a little bit because you dedicate an entire chapter to basically numbers, right? Whether it's cost or who was affected or outages, all that kind of stuff. So I'll get to that in a second. So I mentioned everybody's got a story, right? Don Purdy's out with us. It's Thundersnow of Buffalo. 15 years. That's the anniversary. It was Friday the 13th, 2006. It really kind of got the wheel started turning the night of the 12th, right? And then it kind of
yeah, and that was Thursday the 12th, even in the afternoon in the city of Buffalo. And I remember I was on the phone with our workers' comp attorney, Roger Edel, and he's like, "You would not believe we got a blizzard going on here in the city." And again, we were at Orchard Park. It was still blue skies at that point. And I think I mentioned in the book, when a Buffalonian uses the word blizzard, you better take it seriously. And you could, from my window, I tried to describe this, but you could see, looking due west, which is where my window faced, my office window, blue skies, but you just turn northward and there was a wall of the craziest colored clouds that they didn't look real at all. And indeed, inside, what was happening in those clouds was the city getting a head start on what turned out to be, this crazy storm.
It is, and for those of you that are watching this or listening to it, that have never lived in Western New York or spent, any significant time here, it is something kind of cool, even though obviously the October storm was devastating, to be able to, let's say you're in, North Buffalo, you're in Tonawanda, you're on the 190 and you're driving south towards downtown Buffalo. How many times have we driven that route? It doesn't matter what time of year. And you see a system coming in off the lake and you're saying, holy crap, fill in the blank town is getting whacked right now. And it could be with rain, could be snow, could be any time of the year. But it is one super unique thing because of the way the lake is set up and the way it approaches Buffalo and Western New York, that, yeah, you can see these incredible systems with that, as you described it, wall of clouds coming in. And it's so unique. I don't think you can see that in very many places, even around the world, much less here in Western New York. So that's really, really cool. So let's get to your story, which was one of the worst I've read, to be honest with you, or heard, based on what happened. So walk us through what happened at your house in West Seneca. It was
Yeah.
you and your wife and your kids, and this thing is kind of brewing, and you're starting to hear things and see things, and walk us through it.
Well, sure. We were. I think I mentioned. I know I mentioned in the book that my daughter had a soccer game in Hamburg, so we were watching. We were watching the. Those clouds and wondering. We were hearing from people what was happening inside the clouds, and hearing that it was going to come our way. So got home and it started to snow a little bit. We walked in the door and my daughter was still in her soccer uniform. And I remember we took a picture of, hey, I'm in shorts and my jersey here. It is snowing a little bit, but nothing, the real stuff hadn't happened yet. So it was dark and 11 o'clock, I remember the lights flickered a little bit and we're like, what's going on here? And then they went out completely right at 11 o'clock, just when we really were going to watch the 11 o'clock news and find out what was going on. But at least here in West Seneca, that we never found out. Well, we lived it. So looking outside, you're like, holy cow! I remember the landscape, for as much as we could see, the branches, again, all the leaves were on the trees, and the heavy wet snow was pulling them down. So we tried to go to sleep, but sure enough, all of a sudden those branches started to break and crack. And Kevin Sylvester gave his account. He was in Lancaster like you, and it's on our website, thundersnowofbuffalo.com. He actually gave me a voice memo clip of his take of hearing those trees crack. He said he sounded like bones cracking, which is eerie. And my daughter thought they sounded like gunshots, but they would start with a low rumble, grow and grow and grow, and then combined with this weird blue lightning. And I remember there were players, Angelo Crowell and some others, talking about seeing blue lightning. So he called his mom at 3 a.m. He's like, I'm sorry, I know when you get a call at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m., it's alarming, but don't worry, I'm just calling to tell you that I'm watching a storm right now that I've never seen anything like it in my life. So I mentioned that our neighbor across the street, he's a Buffalo City school teacher. We're all going through the same thing. So he stepped out on his porch to have a smoke to kind of reconcile what he was hearing with what he was seeing. And just as he gets on his porch, he's looking across the street at our house. Our transformer exploded. So here is this. So you have regular blue lightning, but then you have transformers exploding. And I think he was like, wait a minute, this is a cigarette I'm smoking, right? But, my wife was so affected by the blue lightning that she wanted the title of the book to be Thundersnow and Blue Lightning. And we toyed around with it for a while, but I ended up thinking I wanted Buffalo to be in the title of the book quite simply for searches, right? And then Thundersnow of Buffalo, it kind of flowed, right? So it ended up really working. But we did make a title, chapter title, Thundersnow and Blue Lightning. And when we woke up, again, it was just devastation. We walked around like zombies, but everyone just kind of had this unspoken understanding that we got to start. The leaves or branches and entire trees in some cases were on the road. Like no one's going anywhere until we pull these off, and no electrical power truck is coming this way if we don't get these off. And there were live power lines like all intertwined in the branches. So that was our personal story. That's how we woke up on Friday the 13th. And then I'm thinking again, I gotta be with a team to go to Detroit tomorrow.
Right.
How is this going to play out?
And that was a big part of your job, was arranging that trip, right? So
yes.
So that's you left out a big part, by the way.
Did I?
The part that an entire enormous tree fell through your roof into your attic.
Oh, by the way, Rick, I gotta say, listen, I know when you got this book, and I gotta say, I am incredibly impressed with your speed reading and the thoroughness. You've referenced so many points of this book. Your retention is something.
That's what I do. I'm a pro, man. This is that.
I guess so. Never in doubt.
Yeah.
But yeah, a tree came right through. We didn't know it at the time, but it hit the roof, but it went in the attic, and it literally shook the foundation of. We have a 2-story brick home. It's a fairly typical home for the area, but I mean, it shook where we thought some way somehow the foundation of our house has been fractured somewhere, and it turns out we never saw any actual evidence of that, but the tree was in the house,
Yeah.
and
That's and so you had to get your buddies, the weekenders, to come in and help you take it out, and yada yada yada. That's all part of the book.
yes, yes,
But you suffered from that. You suffered from flooding in the basement. People
yeah,
couldn't get not transformers generators because they just weren't available because everybody needed them.
yeah.
So it's an incredible. I mean, like I said, anybody that lived through this is going to read this and be like, oh my god, yes, 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 yes.
Well,
It's
you
Thunder.
did on the phone the other day. You gave me a great story. Had I had that story, it would have been in the book.
My story was pretty simple. I was living in sin, I guess, with my girlfriend, now wife at the time, and she and I were driving to an event we had at Buffalo Wild Wings when it was on transit in East Amherst back in the day, and we were on our way, and the guy got really dark. This is probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Got really, really dark, and we're like, "What is going on here?" Then it started to snow. We're like, "This is weird." And I made a couple phone calls, and they said, "Well, it's the event's canceled." Now we were almost to the bar restaurant at the time, so we're like, okay, we're out. Let's go get a bite to eat or something. So we decide to go south on transit, and everything is dark. All the power's out. We're seeing huge generators explode. The blue lightning. We're hearing and seeing the thunder snow. It was remarkable. But we found one place. There used to be a Pizza Hut across from Eastern Hills Mall that I don't believe is there anymore. In fact, I know it's not there anymore. Wow. So my husband and I are like, all right, we're hungry. This is all there is. Let's just go to Pizza Hut. Okay. So we go into Pizza Hut, and as we're sitting there and ordering, everybody's still kind of freaking out because nobody really knows what's happening. And as we're sitting there, and I don't know if we got the the salad bar and whatever we got, the lights are flickering, and we're like, oh, this is spooky. What's going to happen? Eventually, we get out of there. Then we have to go back to Tonawanda, where at the time we lived, and yeah, we're going past. I mean, lots of impassable major roads. Maple, I believe we went down Maple. I mean, trees down, power lines down. And I'm like, can we drive over these? I don't know. And you actually shared a story, I believe, of one of your front office workers having to drive over like live power lines, some of which that were on fire. I think you
were on fire. She said, yeah, it was still dark at the time. It's 6 o'clock in the morning when she's the administrative assistant to the head coach and GM. So it would have been Marv and Dick Duran at the time, which is in there, but 2 cars ahead of her stopped and she didn't know why. And they were like the only 2 cars on the road. And then all of a sudden they accelerated real fast. And then it was her turn and she saw like why they stopped. There were electrical wires in the road that were on fire. And she's like, well, they did it. She said a quick prayer and she's hit the gas pedal, got through it. And that was part of her adventure getting to the office.
So we know, and now I'm going to get to that chapter on the numbers. It was incredibly expensive. It was incredibly devastating to trees, which I'm going to spend some time with as well, because I know the gentleman who started the group that we're going to talk about. I used to work with him.
Good. Great.
And obviously, traffic and injuries, and there's a whole chapter, like I said, dedicated just to numbers, even the meteorology of it, right?
Mm-hmm. There is, and I think we prefaced that chapter by saying, unless you're talking to an accountant or some statistical
wizard,
analytics person,
yeah,
you're going to lose them pretty fast. So it's actually the shortest chapter in the book, but the numbers are too unbelievable to not include. I got to say, and we referenced anything, Billy Clune did an amazing job of making sure that any numbers, any facts were referenced on the footnotes in microscopic print, but they're there. That the state of New York did a really, really thorough report that I would say almost 2/3 of our numbers came from that report, and it was online. And so the number of transformers that blew, the number of hotel rooms needed for the 500 plus trucks that came from all over the country, mostly the Northeast, to help Buffalo's electricians help restore the area. They are mind-boggling numbers. I don't have them exactly in front of me, but
So I have to get the book.
Yeah, of course, exactly. Yeah, and there's no pop quiz, but
Right.
you'll read it and think, holy cow, this is like you just mentioned. They are mind blowing. There's 55,000 trees that were lost, and get ahead of ourselves here with the Paul Maurer, the gentleman who restored them all. But um, yeah, no, that they're in there and they serve a purpose, and they kind of wrap things up in a bow a little bit in terms of in case you think that all these stories that you just read were just purely anecdotal. No, they're backed up by numbers that are mind blowing.
Yeah, for sure. A portion of the proceeds of the book sales go to two different places. Marv's charity, because Marv wrote the foreword for the book, which is super cool that you were able to have him do that. And then the
Yeah,
other one is Retree, Western New York, which Paul Maurer, who I worked for a very long time in radio sales with, started up Retree, Western New York, whose main and sole purpose really was to replace all of those 55,000 trees that were lost in the October storm. Uh, an incredible movement, an incredible number of trees that were replaced. And I love the part in the book, because I didn't know this until I read the book, that the trees primarily that were planted to replace the ones lost were mostly, if not all, local, right?
yeah. There was two nurseries, one in Springville, one in Orchard Park, I believe. They're both mentioned by name in the book. But first of all, going back to Paul Maurer, I can't imagine this book without him, because he and Therese Fortin Barnes, with her carvings for a cause, what she did with the damaged trees and what she turned them into these statues, was amazing. But what Paul did was basically gave the book um, the good feeling of the recovery. I mean, the city had to recover. The city did a very good job. Local municipalities did a good job. Individuals did, but I mean, he took it upon himself to form this charity, and he had a true understanding of what the trees meant, particularly in the city of Buffalo, and how they helped beautify the landscape. And he said, "This is going to be a long haul," but he goes, "I know there are so many like-minded people out there." He goes, I'm going to make a pitch. I'm going to have some local help, with the Buffalo News and other organizations and radio stations, and get the word out there that, hey, let's get together and try to restore all these trees that were damaged. I mean, Therese Fortin Barnes, in her story again about the statues, we did a Zoom call with her that night, and or we did a Zoom call with her. I'm sorry, I think it was last December, and she talked about the storm, and she broke into tears right on the. Just thinking about how much the trees meant to her. She was near Soldier Circle downtown, and so Paul said just he was blown away, as you'll read, by the number of volunteers. There were times when he had too many, and he had to turn some away. He said, "But don't go too far. There's going to be another tree planting coming up, and I want you to be part of it." And he's still doing it to this day. And I can't imagine the book without him. Yes, part of the proceeds will go to him, and he actually is looking to maybe do another tree planting this coming November. All these years later, he's still looking to do more, because there's still trees that haven't yet been replaced from all those 15 years
That's
ago.
crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, and this epitomizes Buffalo, right? It was a horrible civic situation out of which led to incredible community support. I mean, that's what this town is all about and always has been. And I think Retree West New York was a good example of that. And you mentioned Olmsted Parks and how Frederick Law Olmsted, he said Buffalo was the best designed park like city like in the entire country.
Yeah, in the
And
country. Yeah. Again, Billy Clune, co-author, um, will insert so many. It's so I love hearing you say that, Rich, because like he works so hard at inserting um, relevant, pertinent historical facts without spending too much time on them, but just enough to give support to help readers understand, a little, just enough history behind certain parts of the city. So yeah, that's great.
and again, this is what I love about doing what I'm doing with this podcast is that for people that are watching this, who's Frederick Law Olmsted? Look it up. Look it up. He's the guy that designed Central Park in New York City. He's the guy, if I'm not mistaken, I think was responsible for like Yosemite and like some of the other incredible parks around the country. And he is responsible for Delaware Park and that entire area around Forest Lawn and all of that in Center City, Buffalo. A big reason why the Pan American Exposition in 1901 was able to come here because of that park-like setting. So yeah, if you don't know who Frederick Law Olmsted is, absolutely look it up and see how he affected and what he means to Buffalo City proper. It's really pretty incredible. You mentioned Therese Fortin Barnes and the tree carving. So not all the trees that were lost were ground and made into pulp or mulch. Some were made into statues of really famous people, some of which you probably have seen at places like the Big Tree or you name it. They're all over Western New York. But she sort of drove that movement. And I must say, the Thurman Thomas story about the carved tree to look like Thurman, and I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it was unveiled at a Bills game.
Mm-hmm.
The Bills game happened. They come back. The Thurman Thomas tree statue's gone. Just get into the book and read the story if you haven't heard it. It's sort of folklore in Western New York, true story, but it's remarkable where this Thurman Thomas tree carving ended up and how it was gotten back. So anyway, read that in the book.
I love it. You just teed that up. Teresa goes by T for those of us that really know her.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just got to know her this past year, but that's funny. But you just teed that story up perfectly where, when they do read it as per your intro, they will not be disappointed. It is remarkable and
it's unbelievable.
It is
totally unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the book. Anyway, the book is really great. It's really interesting. It's a lot of background. Like I said, Bill's Mafia. Holy cow! Just read this for like your couple of chapters, sort of dedicated to what you did and your relationship with the players and how you kind of had to deal with them and what they had to deal with and what you guys as an organization had to deal with. And of course, their accounts as well. I mean, you talk about Fitz, you talk about, guys like Brian Moorman and George Wilson back in the day, Ryan Lindell with, they share some of the stories too. And what you did is way above my pay grade, but still super interesting.
I appreciate that, Bill. And, those guys that you just mentioned, I've gotten great feedback from them. They just said it took them back to that time, and they remembered the stories, some really funny stories. I sent Fitz one just recently, and unfortunately, I know he's going to have some time to read. Now he's on IR, but I told him that, get back in the field. But while you're rehabbing, here's some good reading material. He'll remember those stories. I'm sure. As fast as a reader as you are, could you imagine how fast a reader he must be? But
no kidding.
Yeah, but I think one of the best, most fulfilling interviews we had with the player was with Kevin Everett, and I hadn't talked to him in a long time. We were Facebook friends, but for those that remember his tragic, life-threatening injury, his paralysis, opening day 2007. So we did a Zoom call with him. He was in Houston. In the book I mentioned how I had to handle his medical claims and bills, which there had never been anything like it. But Mr. Wilson was like, "Don't hold back a dime, just whatever he needs." But Kevin really enjoyed talking with us, and at some point I'm going to put that interview on our website. But Billy and I went into it. And I said, Billy, let's not. Even though it's the elephant in the room, let's not have us bring up his injury. If he brings it up, fine, we can talk more about it. And he did. He brought it up right away. He had to bring it up. But Kevin had you could tell, a really enjoyable time talking about his Bills career, other than his injury, and including driving in the winter for the first time the year before. And he didn't really, he's a Miami guy, and he was gripping the wheel too tight and came, he said, centimeters from hitting the rail coming down the Skyway. And Roscoe Parrish.
That story is great. The Roscoe Parrish story is phenomenal. You have to read that. That's really funny. He
was terrified. He called Kevin like, "Ha!" And then the adventure begins, which is documented in here. But that was a really fulfilling conversation. I had a lot of them, but that was one that really stands out, I would say.
and Kevin's doing really well for himself.
Yeah.
Just if people wondered.
Yes.
Yeah, the poker in the back of the charter plane, very funny story with the Bills. It's a really great book, and it kind of encompasses everything from average Joe stories in your neighborhood to the Bills players to Bills ownership to, like I mentioned, people in the state police to local government figures, all kind of telling how they all had to deal with it in their particular ways.
The police, Mike Negrelli was that police captain,
Yeah,
and in case you don't know him personally, you would recognize him because he was one of the police officers that we took on the road often. Unfortunately, he didn't have to do it that weekend, but you would remember him,
sure.
Mike, and yeah, he gave us an excellent personal and professional account, and that's something I so appreciate about a lot of the contributions we got from those like Tim Wenger and others in the business that talked about what they were doing that night personally, whether it was out to dinner with their wives and like you, and then having to shift gears and totally unexpectedly kick into professional mode and deal with this, and meteorologists and who just couldn't have imagined that morning that their days would turn out that way and have to shift gears like that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then you actually document the Bills game, getting there, the game itself, getting home, you almost getting killed by Ryan Lindell footballs. It's and the Bills, unfortunately, and yeah, I mean, granted, they were all probably incredibly distracted. They lost that game, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But you could probably understand it. And you bring it up well in the book about that particular game on the 14th of October. No, it would have been the 15th of October, I beg your pardon. In Detroit when they in 2006 that there was nobody there had any idea what the Bills organization had gone through in the previous 36 hours. They had no clue that their lives were turned upside down before they played that football game. I thought that was really pretty interesting in your storytelling. Again, it's Thundersnow of Buffalo, the October surprise storm. Don Purdy, Billy Clune, Marv Levy with the forward. It's 15 years since the October storm hit. This is a really great read for Buffalonians, Western New Yorkers, Bills fan. It's super cool. Dude, thanks for doing this, man. I really hope the book continues to take off and has great successes. And don't be a stranger, all right?
I appreciate it, Bo. This has been very enjoyable. Great to hear about your podcasts, and I'm going to catch up on more of them. And yeah, I really, the way you frame things here with the book, you make me want to read it again.
Awesome.
So
if I can sell the author on a book, that's pretty good. I've done my job. Don, thank
very
you,
well.
man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Great being with you. Thanks.